I want to welcome everyone. My name is Dan Martin. I'm the Safe Community Coordinator for the Village of New Lenox, and I'm very pleased to be here tonight. I thank all of you so much for being here. This is an effort between our village and our Safe Communities America Coalition. We have over 35 organizations that partner with us that put on this event tonight. So I'd like to thank all those participating organizations, all of our volunteers that help with setup tonight, Dr. Kathleen Burke that did the Narcan training in the community room. I'd like to thank everybody for coming out and participating. We've got a great lineup tonight, so we'll get started. We're a little behind because of Narcan training, so I don't want to delay anymore. The first speaker I'd like to introduce is Mayor Tim Balderman from the Village of New Lenox.
Thank you. I want to thank all of you for being out here tonight. This is the International Overdose Awareness Day event. And what a shame it is that most people are aware of what's happening not only in this area but in the country with this epidemic. But a lot of communities refuse to acknowledge that it's happening right there in their own home. They think that it's some sort of stigma or that it reflects poorly on their community. We here in the Village of New Lenox were one of the very first to hold a symposium on opioid and heroin addiction. We did that back, I believe, in 2010. We have been attacking it ever since then, and we will continue to do that. It's naive to bury your head in the sand and think that it won't happen here. New Lenox is a great community. The Lincoln Way area is a great area with great people. But addiction doesn't just belong to criminals or people who are uneducated or poor. It affects everyone. And all you have to do is look at this table and see the pictures, the diversity of the pictures of the wonderful people that were on this table here, and know that we have an obligation as human beings beyond just elected officials to do something for our fellow man. And so as long as I'm the mayor here, I'm going to make sure that we continue to attack this epidemic, not only from a law enforcement standpoint, which is important, but more importantly from a compassionate standpoint. Our police department has a program called Second Chance. And if somebody is struggling with addiction, or if a family member has a loved one that's struggling with addiction, they can call the police department and say, hey, we need help. And we will go over there. They can give us their drugs. They can tell us we need help. We'll help them get into counseling without fear of arrest and prosecution, because we're here to help. That's most important. Again, look at the faces that are here and the countless other faces that we don't see on the table. This disease, this addiction, doesn't know race, it doesn't know religion, it doesn't know economic status, it doesn't know village borders. It impacts all of us, and not only those that are struggling with addiction, but the loved ones that care so deeply for them. So we have that obligation. We are so proud under the Safe Communities umbrella to be partnering with all of the vendors that are here, all of the volunteers that are here. I was just having a conversation. We were talking about the Hero trailer. What a great trailer that is, and how we want that here in our town. That doesn't say that New Lenox is a bad community. It says New Lenox is a typical community, like you see all across the country, of people that are struggling and need help. And we will be here to help every step of the way. So Dan, thank you to you, Safe Communities, to all of our speakers that are here and our vendors, and for all of you who have come out. Because quite often, people feel like, well, it doesn't affect me, I don't need to know about it. The sad thing is, the way this epidemic is growing, in our lifetime, we are all going to know somebody that's been impacted by this. So let's address it right now. Let's address it head on, not just with speeches, but with action. So thank you for being out here tonight. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And the mayor referenced a symposium that we did. That's going back to probably 2010, one of the first communities that we did that. And one of the gentlemen that was instrumental, he was at that very first symposium, and is still a strong advocate for everything that we do to try to combat this epidemic, is our state's attorney, Mr. Jim Glasgow.
It's a pretty good turnout. I was at Linkaway West last night, and we only had maybe 20 people. So this is a credit to New Lenox. In 1998, I saw a blurb come across for a drug court grant, but it was a judicial grant. So I went across the street, and I asked the chief judge, I said, you know, I know you don't have any staff. Do you mind if I write this? So I did. And when I went to the site visits, I was the only prosecutor there. And the judges were saying, what are you doing here? My prosecutor doesn't want this. Well, I was adopted, and I've always believed that there but for the grace of God go I. And as much as I think I have a reputation as an aggressive prosecutor, I'm just as aggressive in pursuing prevention programs. And our drug court has been phenomenal. In 2000, a young lady went through our drug court and got a felony conviction dismissed. She went to college, she went to law school, and I hired her as a prosecutor in the office that prosecuted her. There isn't a greater validation that we could have had. But that drug court now is indispensable. With the heroin epidemic that we have, just 10 years ago, we had single-digit fatal overdoses. We're approaching 100 a year now. And that's with everybody, with all hands on deck. In 2011, we met in Homer Glen when we first saw that the uptick was coming with the heroin overdoses. And we've had an annual conference every year at Lewis University and in Romeoville with attendance of 300 to 400 professionals from all different disciplines coming together trying to attack this problem. And even in the face of that, the numbers keep growing. This drug is so potent and so deadly. The little line that you snorted the night before, if you get it from a different dealer, it could be more toxic and you're dead. And the young people, once they get hooked on heroin, they're not going to listen to the normal rational arguments on why they shouldn't, because their rational thought processes they come undone. It disturbs your brain chemistry. And I just want everyone here to know that any one of us, no matter how tough we think we are or how the indomitability of human spirit we can conquer anything, if I used heroin tonight, tomorrow I'm an addict. Plain and simple. Doesn't matter who you are. No, doesn't matter what economic strata you come from. And there was a movie called The French Connection. Anybody ever see that? It goes back a while. Popeye Doyle was the toughest New York detective that ever was. And in the French Connection 2, where he went to France to the cartel and infiltrated the cartel to stop the heroin coming into this country. Well, they kidnapped him, they duct taped him to a chair, and they shot him up with heroin. And they owned him. He was a sniveling, begging for more heroin. Of course, in the movie, he escapes and he gets himself back together again. But the bottom line, that struck me because a lot of people are judgmental on people who are addicted to heroin, and you shouldn't be, because it could happen to you like that. Over the years, I've tried to use my drug forfeiture money to plow it back into the community, and recently, we've been able to purchase transport vans for the Forest Park Center in the Black community, the Spanish Center, the Girls and Boys Club, and that black vehicle that's pulling the bedroom. I ran into John Roberts at Romeoville, and his trailer hitch was on the ground. I said, "Where's your vehicle?" He said, "We don't have one." So I got on the phone and called Terry Darcy, who's a local car dealer who's partnered with me on all those vehicle purchases, and we each kicked in 10 grand, and then Hero kicked in 10 grand, and now they have a vehicle. But it's that kind of stuff. I've always been aggressive. In 2007, the veterans didn't have a bus to get the veterans to Hines Hospital. And I found a guy that overbought hotel buses in Florida, $90,000 buses. He was wholesaling them out for 65 grand. The next day, my office manager hands me a money laundering check for $65,000. And we bought the bus, and the veterans got to where they needed to go. But this is the kind of, I'm not doing this to brag. I'm hoping that other elected officials, especially prosecutors, will see that this is what you can do. there are 6 municipalities that I bought drug dogs for. And the reason I did it is not just to lock people up. We want to get the drug dealers off the street, but we also want to catch the kids with the heroin and get the heroin away from them and get them into counseling and treatment. We've got all kind of programs in Will County that are just head and shoulders above anywhere else. Our drug court, we've got 2 halfway houses, one for men, one for women. I don't think there's another county in the state that has that, maybe Cook, but we also are looking right now at a transition house for the men, which is huge because right now you have to shop around to the various agencies to place these people. We will be in total control of all of the people that come through our drug court. And we have a 90% success rate since 2000 on the participants not relapsing on drugs. That is phenomenal. And we're working on, it's going to take time, but we're working on an alumni system where we stay with these graduates ad infinitum. In other words, if they get into a difficult place, 3 o'clock in the morning, they can call one of our counselors and we'll come and get them. Because if they don't have any other options, they're going to relapse. And we've had 3 or 4 of our drug court participants fatally overdose during the treatment process, even though it's the best treatment that I have ever seen. We lock people up for 6 months, which is critical. When you're addicted to heroin, it takes probably a good 3 months of staying clean before you start to see the fog lift and you start to care about yourself and want to get back in the game. And I've lost track of the number of drug court graduates, the heroin addicts, that have come up to us afterwards and say, you know, if it wasn't for this drug court, I would be dead. They get it, they know it. So Will County stands head and shoulders. I just ran into a young lady that went through the Redeploy Illinois program. And this is for people who are convicted felons who just cycle through our prison system, costing us 30 grand a year for them to sit on their butts and then have their life be further destroyed. We've hooked up with local businesses. We've explained to them this $30,000 of your tax dollars going right down the toilet, but you can hire this young person and we'll have the sword of Damocles over their head. If they screw up, we can yank them and send them to prison if that's what's going to happen. But we have a 50% success rate, and this young lady that's here tonight is thriving. And she never had a chance before. She got in trouble when she was young, had a continuing downward spiral, and she comes out of prison, she can't get a job. And you talk about prime candidates to become addicts, that would be a person who would. So there's a lot to be proud of here in Will County, and we're working really hard to continue this effort. And if you know anybody that's in trouble, Julie McCabe-Stir runs my drug court program, and I have a licensed psychologist who works for me directly. We don't farm it out. So if you are up against it and you don't know where to turn, call my office, and we'll see if we can get you help. But again, thank you so much for coming out tonight, and we're going to beat this problem. Thank you.
Jim, thank you. Thank you everything that you do for Will County and New Lenox in particular. We couldn't do it without your support. The next speaker I'd like to introduce is Brian Kirk from Hero. But before I do that, I know I recognize a lot of the volunteers. I've got to call one out in particular, and she's going to be really angry at me when I do this. But Jan Dombrowski is standing over here. Everything that you see here tonight, all the organization putting all this together, Jan Dombrowski did a wonderful job. So can we just give her good job, Jan. So we couldn't do this. Our village, our Safe Communities Coalition couldn't do this without the support. And HERO, the Heroin Epidemic Relief Organization in particular, and a good friend of ours and a man that's instrumental in that trailer sitting across the street is Brian Kirk. I'd like to introduce Brian.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for coming out and helping support what is happening with this epidemic. I know we're all here celebrating the lives of the people we lost, as shown on these tables. But please, let's not forget the ones who are still fighting the battle. And there's lots of them out there. I'm going to keep this kind of short on my half. As a lot of people know, I lost my son, Matthew, to a heroin overdose on April 3rd of 2009. And after I lost my son, John Roberts lost his son about 4 months later, and we kind of hooked up together and said we need to do something. So this is what we're doing. I would never have thought in my wildest dreams I would be up here talking about how I had to put my son in a body bag as I helped the police take him out of my home. This is the worst of the worst, believe me. My son and I had a very kind of a non-communicado way of getting along with each other. There's constant arguments about the drugs. Although my son actually passed away from the heroin without ever telling me that he was doing heroin. The only way I found out he was doing heroin was one morning. I woke up, I came down to the kitchen table, and there was a sheet of paper like this sitting right by where I sit at the kitchen table. And on that piece of paper was the word Suboxone. No idea what Suboxone was. So I go to work, look it up, find out it has to do with heroin. Just like, this can't be happening. This just can't be happening. But like I said, his mother and I were going through a divorce, so it was just my son and I at home in Homer Glen at the time. So we had trouble communicating a lot. So my son would write letters to me. That's how he communicated with me. So I want to read you this one letter that he left for me. This was probably about 2 months before he passed away. So he writes, "Dear Father, you have influenced my life greatly and have made a major impact on me. You raised me to be the best that I could be. And when I looked at you, I saw a very caring person, someone who will always be by my side. I took after you with sports. We both played hockey, had the same taste for cars, but somewhere along the lines, I got off track. Drugs ruined my life so bad, I never really got a chance to say how sorry I was. You taught me right from wrong. You would play games with me, and that showed me how much you cared about me. But I don't know why I chose to do drugs. You always said, don't mess with it because it will ruin your life. And I even had my own brother as an example. Now I have lost touch with reality, and I would rather go smoke than be with you. But luckily, you caught on at the right time and tried to get me help. Even though I did not want to go do it. I did because life is too short, and I realized I needed to spend more time with the people who raised me the right way than the people who just looked at me as a smoking buddy. You taught me how to manage things like money, daily tasks and problems, and how to live life at its fullest. And for that, Dad, I thank you. And I wanted you to know that I will do anything for you. And just because I may have said I hated you or I was never going to talk to you, that meant nothing. And I will always love you because you taught me how to be a respectful, caring, and responsible person. Dad, I love you. Love always, your son, Matt. For the people that have lost somebody, I'm so very sorry. But right now, I'm even just as sorry for the people that are still battling. And there's a lot of people out there still battling. Not just heroin, but any type of opioids, alcohol, etc. I want to thank everybody again for being here. Thank you and good night.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you for sharing your story and for everything that you do for Hero and for our community. Now I'd like to introduce a young lady that I just met tonight. Her name is Amy, and she'd like to share a story and some hope.
Hi, my name is Amy, and I am a recovering heroin addict. Jan, Hero asked me to speak tonight. I'm very grateful for every aspect of everybody that's involved, and for the city of New Lenox and all they're doing. It is phenomenal. I'm a person in 12-step recovery. My sobriety date is August 27th of 2013. I just celebrated 5 years of sobriety. I'll try not to get too emotional. So I don't have that great of emotional sobriety, but so addiction was part of my family, and heroin addiction long before I was ever born. My dad was a heroin addict in the 70s. My mom was an alcoholic and a very codependent person. My mom and dad split when I was young, and most of my life my dad was absent due to incarceration. My mom was absent due to addiction, but was physically present. So the thing I remember the most about my childhood was fear. You know, what are we gonna eat today? Is the power gonna get turned off? Where are we gonna live? We're gonna have to go to a new school. Who's this new guy my mom's bringing home? How much time is my dad gonna get? You know, my coping skills to that were like a reaction. Life went by so fast, and it was so stressful that I learned to just react to life and situations and get things done the quickest way. At a very early age, I started smoking weed, and it became my next coping skill for things I couldn't get away from, and the fear and the stress of life as a young kid. And I mean young kid, I mean 4th grade young kid. Smoking cigarettes, smoking weed. We were mainly alone a lot, me and my little brother. My brother's 3 years younger than me, and I cannot remember not looking out for him most of my life. And so, you know, I'm that poster child for marijuana as a gateway drug. I really am. I always swore that I would not do the drugs they did. My mom was a meth addict, my dad was a heroin addict, they were both alcoholics, and I always swore I would not be them, and I would not put my children through what they put me through. My grandma was my mom growing up, and my mom was more like my sister. When I was 21 years old, I was still just a pothead, and my grandma died. And that was the only security I ever had in life. That was the only adult that I ever had that I felt safe with. And she passed away, and I had a child, and I started using substances to get through work. You know, my disease tells me if I do a little meth, I can have more energy, I can be a better parent. I can cook more and clean more and go to more school things and more activities. And that's what happened. And then I went to prison, and I started to realize I'm becoming them. But it wasn't as apparent as it eventually got. So I got sober through a 12-step program. I had 4 more children. I had 4 children that were 3 and under at one time. In case you can't figure that one out, I have twins. So I moved to Illinois, and I had a surgery for a hernia. And through that surgery, I got prescribed opiate pain pills. And I had never been an opiate addict. My brother was a heroin addict, my dad was a heroin addict, my sister was a heroin addict, and I was never gonna be a heroin addict. And the opiate pain pills, you know, I could rationalize probably my disease, because I'm an addict, would rationalize and say, it's not heroin and it's not meth, and you know, it's a prescription, it's okay. And eventually I started using more and more and more and more and more, and heroin is a lot cheaper. 4 out of 5 heroin addicts became a heroin addict through a legitimate pain pill prescription. I'm one of those 4 out of 5 statistics. Years went by, and I actually came to this area. I'm originally from Southern California. I moved here because my kid's father's from Illinois, And the only reason why I live in the city of Joliet is because my children were taken from me in the midst of my heroin addiction and placed in a foster home in Lockport, Illinois. So I wanted to go back to heroin addiction. I wrote this down so I would not skip around. I'm sorry that I did, but in heroin addiction, that huge thing that I started using drugs for was fear of life, my reaction to life. I didn't have good coping skills. I wasn't taught good coping skills. And I know there's people out there that are raised by addicts and they get good coping skills. For some reason, I didn't get them and I didn't latch onto them. And so I started using heroin to escape all these fears that I had about being a good mom and being a good person and dealing with life and paying bills and maintaining employment. And then what I started using heroin to get away from, just heroin made it worse. The fear of being dope sick is the thing that kept me using for so long. It's like impending doom. Heroin addiction consumes your every thought, your every waking moment. How are you going to get more? Where are you going to find it? What are you going to do to get it? As soon as you get it, you're back to it, For a long time, I wanted out, but I was just stuck in sick and well. I was either sick or well, sick or well, sick or well. And at that time, treatment wasn't as readily available as it is now. I remember walking to a hospital and I was going there and I had gotten my kids back and their dad had overdosed a couple days before that. And I said, this is it. We're not doing this again and we're not getting them taken away again. And I remember I was walking and I weighed about 98 pounds and I'm walking to the hospital and I get to the stop sign and it's the judge that gave me my kids back. And I know he knows. And I walked into that hospital and of course they couldn't find a vein and they couldn't give me an IV and they handed me the same piece of paper that I already had at home that I had been calling for months on end to get help to get into detox. And thank God I have a God that I have because I used to sit there and pray, just please help me. And God helped me. It always comes in the form of the sheriff's department, but that's okay because it saved my life. I am forever grateful for my probation officer that saved my life. So I wanted to say really quick that, to the people that have lost somebody, my family members are on those tables, and there's more family members that we didn't bring because some of our family members just aren't ready to say, yeah, they died from a heroin overdose, but they did. I just want to tell you guys that it was never not about loving you. If it was not about loving somebody or loving my kids enough, I never would have been an addict in the first place. I loved my kids before I became a heroin addict. It's on two different planes. It's not even the same thing. It changes you. I remember sitting on my porch just crying, crying that just please let this dose kill me. Being dead was more becoming than what I was going to have to do again to get well after this dose was gone. Thank God that didn't happen because I lost so much. Heroin consumed me so much, I lost everything. I lost my children, my freedom, who I was as a human being. The only thing I didn't lose was my life, but I lost myself. Who I was as a person, I couldn't find within me. So I just want you to know that you not loving them enough, you not doing enough, I know what it's like to love a heroin addict, and it's way harder than being one. My brother's a heroin addict. I have my brother's little girl. Her mom lost her life on the way to detox. It wasn't a heroin overdose, but it was a car accident on the way to detox. Heroin has ravished my life, my whole life, and I became what I swore I would never be. And it was all due to starting on opiate pain pills. I know I only have 5 minutes, but I also wanted to say, that I'm in a 12-step recovery program. That's what worked for me. If you're a heroin addict in this crowd and you think you can't say anything, you're ashamed to say anything, you don't want your parents to know, reach out. We have a table over there. You can come talk to us. We don't have to tell nobody. We can help you find help. Even though I have 6 kids, I'll get up at 2 a.m. and drive anybody to detox. But then poses the problem. You can't find a bed in detox. I mean, that's what needs to improve. I work for the treatment center that I went to. I went to Stepping Stones 5 years ago. And I've worked at Stepping Stones for 3 years, and I'm grateful. But even working there, we don't have beds for every person that calls. And we don't have assistants right that second to help them, you know? So I know that everybody from multiple aspects are trying to improve this and be able to get people help. We all have to work together. And I'd like to thank you all and thank you for your perspective coming from you on heroin addiction. We're not bad people. You know, we made some bad choices. And once you get into heroin addiction, you get stuck. You are stuck there, you know? And for me, jail was the only thing that worked. So I'm grateful that I went to jail, and I'm grateful to Hero, this whole thing and this whole program. And I knew my phone was gonna ring when I was up here. So thank you.
Amy, thank you for sharing your story. Next gentleman, I'd like to introduce another good friend and supporter of everything we do here in the village and our Safe Communities Coalition is Mr. John Roberts from Hero.
I got to tell you, I was so honored when I was asked to speak tonight, especially tonight for this event, when we're all called to remember those who we lost. As Brian mentioned earlier, I lost my son Billy at the age of 19 on September 20th, 2009. I was asked to speak to you guys about Hero tonight, and it's easy for me to do, to explain how and why the Heroin Epidemic Relief Organization was founded by Brian Kirk and I. You already heard it was in 2009 when I met this man for the first time, Brian Kirk, when he came to my son's memorial service. Bear in mind, ladies and gentlemen, that he had just lost his own son just 4 months earlier. Brian told me that he had lost his son to a drug overdose, and he offered to help my family. Brian explained that he knew what my family had gone through while Billy was struggling with his drug problem, and he knew the acute pain and anguish that we were suffering and would be suffering for some time. I'd like you all to know it's for this reason that I often refer to this man as the first hero. He set aside his own grief to help a neighbor deal with their grief and loss. In the months that followed, Brian and I met on several occasions as we struggled to comprehend this incredibly complex disease of addiction that was sweeping across our community. Through our meetings, we found evidence that many other families in our community were contending with serious drug abuse problems, and many of the problems were due to prescription pain medications and heroin. We also discovered shortly thereafter several other nearby communities had also been hard hit by the growth and spread of heroin and opioids. And the same problem, unfortunately, was also occurring and being reported in several other large cities. Although it was 2009 and the problem was just beginning to emerge at that time, Brian and I correctly identified the problem as an epidemic, and we're very proud of the fact we are one of the first ones to refer to it as that terrible name. We found that the abuse of these drugs was causing the rather virulent disease of addiction to be passed from one person to another, and the disease was growing and spreading at an incredibly fast rate. Brian and I decided that we could not sit idle and watch other families suffer our same fate, and we decided that we had to do something, and we started out by just trying to warn other families, just like Brian had done for me when he came to help my family. Brian suggested organizing a march and a rally in our own community of Homer Glen. We planned to march down the main street of our community and then hold a rally so that we could draw attention to the growing problem, but more importantly, to warn other families. In spite of our passion to help other families, we soon realized we were just two dads, and we had no clue how to organize a march and a rally. We then turned to a good friend who's also here with us tonight, Paul Lauritsen from Stepping Stones. At the time, Paul was the clinical director of Stepping Stones in Joliet, and I had met with him on several occasions and worked with him. Paul agreed to help, and over the next several months, we planned our march and rally. Simultaneously, Paul helped us seek official recognition as a public charity. Paul suggested inviting several local political leaders. We were very fortunate when several state and local political leaders accepted our invitation, including, and I have to point to him, my good friend Jim Glasgow. He was there that day along with Larry Walsh and several other representatives from Will County. On that long-awaited day of our inaugural event, I was busy at the site of the rally, a grassy field next to Menards, making final preparations, and Brian was meeting with the folks who came out to march with us. Well, I got to tell you, I'll never forget when Brian Kurt came over, like here, coming over the rise of that hill, he was followed by 700 people. I was so impressed and thought, oh my God, how lucky we are, and then I thought more deeply, no, that's just another symptom of how serious this problem is. In the weeks that followed, we came to refer to that inaugural event as the March of Heroes. We called it that to honor all the people who, like you tonight, came out to support Hero and fight against the heroin epidemic. While I will always consider Brian Kirk the first hero, we so greatly appreciated the second hero, Paul Lauritsen. Paul, are you here? There he is, sitting in the background. Paul helped us immensely, and he also brought with him other support, such as the members of the Southwest Coalition. But that's how Hero started, in a community and with help from our friends. We so greatly appreciated the support of other heroes like our new friends from Will County. I mentioned Larry Walsh and Jim Glasgow, who not only joined us that day, but who subsequently launched many new initiatives to fight the epidemic. You heard several of them mentioned. But Larry Walsh, who's not here tonight, I'd like you all to know that within 2 weeks, Larry Walsh, the chief executive of Will County, started a program called HELPS. Heroin Education Leads to Preventative Solutions. The man is an incredible guy. He's a grandfather, he has a large family, and he put himself in our shoes, and he went out and he joined the fight. Over the last few years, we have been joined by other heroes from New Lenox, like Terry Steckley, Jan and Craig Dombrowski, Dan Martin, our Safe Communities Director, and all of these folks have been tireless in their support, and I emphasize the word tireless. Many, many, many hundreds of hours of volunteer time. Brian and I were recently interviewed, and I described New Lenox as a model community in the fight against the epidemic. Thank you, Mayor Baldwin. I mean that. If every community would do what New Lenox is doing, this epidemic would already be collapsing. We have been able to organize and offer regularly scheduled grief support and family support meetings once we started Hero. And our target was to help families, the families of Will and Cook County. And now we're getting ambitious and we're growing and we're looking forward to moving into Grundy and Kankakee counties because there are so many families in need and this problem has spread so far. Hero has also launched drug education, drug prevention programs, and we have supported several overdose prevention programs. I appreciated the compliment about our in plain sight trailer. We've been very lucky, very successful. Our school initiation program, or school visitation program is starting to grow. And we also recently were recognized by the state as a certified naloxone trainer. So one last thing is we've helped to support and write new drug legislation and policies. But most importantly, we've remained true to our primary purpose. We continue to offer help and to find ways to support families impacted by the epidemic. I would like to also add that we are now working closely with some incredibly wonderful people from Heroin Anonymous, HA, Brian said so correctly that although there are many of us who have lost a loved one, we're fighting to help those who are fighting through their problem. HA is an incredible organization. In recent months, Will County has seen four HA groups start up now serving most of Will County, and it's nothing that Hero did. They get all the credit. They're amazing young men and women, and I would like to ask you to offer another round of applause for them. Like Amy talked about, finding your way back in, fighting your way back in, HA is instrumental in doing that. In closing, I would like to share with you some of my thoughts as I prepared my comments for tonight's somber and very solemn event. I recalled the words of one of my favorite poems that I learned more than 50 years ago in an English lit class in high school. Yes, I'm that old. The poem was written by John Donne, and it is entitled, "For Whom the Bell Tolls." This poem influenced my thinking as a young man and over the course of my life. This poem taught me that we must always remain mindful of and true to the duty that we owe to our neighbors and our community, as Mayor Baldeman said so eloquently. I applied that lesson that I learned from this poem during my 45 years of public service as a police officer, and I think it also inspired my work with Hero. I am sure many of you will recall that John Donne said that because we are all part of mankind, any person's death is a loss to all of us. I quote, "Any man's death diminishes me because I am involved in mankind, and therefore never send to know for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee." I would like to thank everyone who came here tonight to remember those who have been lost to a drug overdose. I would especially like to thank all of you who joined the March of Heroes over the last 9 years. And I would like to invite everyone here tonight who has not yet joined the fight to please make a pledge to fight the epidemic, even if it's just by making a donation to Hero or to another group. HA, I don't know if they accept donation, they're pretty self-reliant. Bottom line is everybody, we have a motto, everybody can do something. After all, if two boneheaded dads can figure out how to do stuff like this, everybody can do something to help. And it's important that we hear these words. We must all come to grips with the startling fact that the United States has lost, brace yourself, 704,637 lives due to drug overdose since the turn of the century. 704,000 lives have been lost. I think it's time that we put an end to this epidemic. I think we must all learn we need not to send to see for whom the bell tolls, because it clearly tolls for thee. So please join the fight, be a hero, and help save lives. Thank you, and may God bless all of you.
Thank you, John, and once again, thank you for everything that you do for Hero in our community. Now I'd like to introduce Mike Leverade from Family First Interventions.
Hi everybody, I'm Mike Laverde with Family First Intervention, and I'm also a heroin addict. You know, when I came here tonight, I thought I knew what I was going to say, and I came down here and I walked by these pictures, and although I don't know any of those people personally, I know what they were up against because I was too, and it just changed my whole thought process about what I was going to say. And I got real emotional when I saw those pictures, and I went and I sat over there and I texted my wife and I just said, "I love you." And I looked at the picture of my 3-year-old twin daughters, and I just thought, God, don't take them before me. I just hope to God they don't have what I have. You know, I grew up in a very physically and emotionally abusive household by my father. And from a very young age, you know, I hated where I lived, and I just hated my childhood. And I even learned early on that lying was a good thing because lying got me out of a couple of beatings. And I learned that that was the way to live. And, you know, I eventually went to college, and I got a degree in finance. And I went to work for a Big Five accounting firm, Arthur Anderson, and that was in 1997. And in 2002, I was doing 18 months in the Sheridan Correctional Center for drug charges. And then I got out, and by 2005, I remember my final days. I was walking down Austin Avenue on the west side of Chicago with one shoe, with $8 in my pocket, trying to getting a $10 bag. And my family, who were huge enablers, who let me live in a house with free food and free utilities and free everything, and just kind of had the whole basement to myself, they just had enough. And they had called an intervention company, and my mom had told me what the guy had said, and she said, the intervention is going to happen either on your terms or on society's terms. It's either us or death, and if you're lucky, you'll end up in jail. And I already done jail, and I actually had heroin. I got high the day I got out. And, when I look back on my life, I just think, just how grateful I am today to have what I have and the tools of recovery that I have. I'm in a 12-step program, too. And, I know, from working the steps, and I go back and I look, I ran on self-propulsion. I mean, I was the smartest guy that I knew, and I had all the answers. And I thought I could beat heroin on my own. I graduated from college. I made good business decisions. But it almost took my life. I mean, it took me to the brink of insanity. As some of the people up here talked about, you can't rationalize where you're at. But, I know I'm going to jump a little bit all over the place. I don't have much time. But I remember my mother telling me one thing, and, I'll never forget what she said when we were at the intervention. She said she used to sit outside my bedroom door at night to make sure I didn't stop breathing because my breaths were so shallow because I was almost going into overdose death. But yet she still kept paying my bills. She kept taking care of me. And I remember after the intervention, I said no. I didn't want to go. And I went out, and I remember I came back to the house. Now, this is a woman who would never, I remember her saying this, my son lived under my heart for 9 months. I can't do this. I can't kick him out. I can't do what you're asking me to do. And after it, I showed back up at the house, and I knocked on the front door, and she didn't open it. And then 4 Des Plaines police from Des Plaines pulled into the cul-de-sac, and they got out. My mom opened the garage door, and she just says, "Get off my property." And then that was it. I was homeless. And 4 days later, I had checked into a treatment center. And as Mr. Glasgow alluded to, the 30-day thing, I went through 19 30-day treatment centers. All it did was lower my tolerance. And I eventually went away for 6 months, and I didn't come back to Illinois for 3.5 years. And I needed that. And it took at least 4 months for the obsession to remove. And I share this really quick story that will sound irrelevant, but there's a point to it. I remember I was in my halfway house. I was there 4.5 months, and I woke up one morning, and I thought about this. One of my friend's girlfriends, she was a softball pitcher. And I thought about, as a sophomore, she was pitching against the varsity baseball players. It was like this event. And she was striking them all out, and everyone thinks, well, why is he telling that story? And the reason I remember that story so vividly, like the day my children were born, because it was the first time in 10 years where the first thought of the day wasn't getting high. And I'll never forget that. And that obsession took a long time to remove. And, today I just, in my work, and 80% of my calls are for heroin addicts. And all these families are ever told is their loved one has to want help and they have to hit bottom. And that's all my mother was ever told. He has to want, he has to hit bottom. And the gentleman that she worked with basically said, well, why don't you get out of the way so that can happen? And she did. And I thank God for that. So I've made this my life's work. I'm back in graduate school at GSU getting a master's in addiction studies. I'm a certified intervention professional, and I love what I do. I haven't worked in 13 years because I just love what I do. But it does remind me every day what we're up against out there. And I stopped counting the families that have called me back who have told me that their sons and daughters have passed and they wish they would have done something because they're no longer with us. And it's just sad. And there isn't a lot of help out here, as she alluded to. And a lot of families can't afford it, and that is unfortunate, but we do the best we can. But, like I said, I came out here, I thought I was going to say something different, but, those pictures just hit home because I saw myself in every single one of those people, and I'm grateful to be alive today, and that's all I have.
Thank you, Mike. Thanks for sharing that story and again, turning things around and doing so many good things for others. Before I turn this over to Billy Knott, our pastor from Revolution Church, I would just like to thank one more time all of our speakers up here, if we could get a round of applause. And again, thank you to all the organizations that participated tonight, the volunteers that put this together. We truly couldn't have done this without you, so thank you so much. So I will turn it over for our closing to Pastor Billy Knott from Revolution Church.
Well, I count it an honor to be here with these fine people tonight and to be able to close this up tonight with you good folks. And I'm going to make this short and really direct and to the point, because I believe that with the epidemic that we're facing as a nation and as a people, the best way to do things is to cut straight to the chase. And with the name of this evening being Your Light Still Shines, what I wanted to really do is not try to pull any attention away from the lives of those that have already been lost. I can tell you that when we came here several hours ago, and the team that I came with, we have a team of folks that are here to pray with you guys tonight. We came down here when there was really no one else around, and we walked around and looked at the pictures and prayed a little bit. And I got to tell you that nearly 20 years in ministry, I've unfortunately had to bury more than my share of youth and teenagers. And there's nothing more heart-wrenching than looking into the face of a parent that knows that they're going to outlive their children. And I don't say this as somebody who's trying to be holy or pure or perfect. I'm the pastor of a church, but we all have history. Everybody here does. And I come from a background of using a lot of cocaine and things like that. I thank the Lord that I never got too far in that I wasn't able to get out. But I've had lots of friends that have never made that journey back out. And I can tell you that some of the greatest feelings that I've seen come out of people are parents when they realize that their kids have gotten sober and when family members have become clean. And so that's something I think that we can all be praying about. And I think that's something that with people doing what they're doing here in New Lenox with outreaches like this and making it something that's important and something that's talked about as we begin to move forward as a country, we need to find a way through this epidemic together. And I can tell you that my oldest daughter, she's an EMT. Her husband is a paramedic. They work with ambulances every day. And every time I talk to her, she tells me about people that they pick up that are either in cardiac arrest or they're ODing or they're on their way to the emergency room. And she's lived through it. I hear about it. We live through it at the church. We've all been through this as people. And it's something we've got to do something about. And what I want to encourage you with tonight, before we wrap up, is this, that there is hope. And I want to thank Amy for sharing her story earlier, to find out, you know what, she admits what she's been through, but by the grace of God, she's not in that place anymore. And I find that encouraging. And I want to encourage the rest of you, especially those that have lost people. I understand that it hurts. We all do. But we can get through this, and we can work hard to be in communication and love with one another so that we can help those that are struggling even now. And so I just want to tell you that, again, the last thing I want to tell you about myself is the last time I used was in June of 1990. So 28 years and 2 months, I've been clean. And I thank God for that. And I want you to know that there's always hope. So for everybody here, what I want to do here in wrapping up is you'll notice that when you came in, everybody was given a little votive with a candlelight in it. If you haven't turned that on yet, you just pull it out of the cup, flip the little switch on the bottom. I'm going to ask you if you have one to go ahead and do that. Just turn that on. We're going to take just a moment, and I'm going to pray with you. But before we do, I want you to understand that even though some have gone before us, their light still shines. We can still do things in their memory. We can still remember. We can still love. And I want to tell you that just for a moment, let's take these little candles that are in your hands. I'm going to ask you to hold on to those. I'm going to ask you, if you would, to just take a moment and just bow your head. Just bow your head, just close your eyes all across this place. I'm going to ask you to take a couple of seconds. And I want you to think good thoughts about those that have went before, those that we have lost. And I want you to think about someone that you, in just a moment when I pray with you, can pray for to get clean. I'm going to give you just a couple seconds, so if you would just go ahead and do that in silence. And I want you, if you don't mind, just to join me in a word of prayer. Lord God, we just come to you tonight. We remember those that we have lost. We remember that their light still shines. And we think now of those that are struggling, those that need help, those that are under the bondage of addiction. And we pray now together that God, with your wisdom, with your power, that you would break the chains of bondage that keep these good people stuck in addiction. We pray for their freedom from that tonight. We pray for their release from that tonight. We ask that through the power of your Holy Spirit, you would minister to these people here tonight. And you would begin a work in those that desperately need release and deliverance from addiction. We thank you, Lord, that you've given us an opportunity to gather and to remember. For we ask it in Jesus' name. Amen. I want to tell you one last thing before we dismiss, and that is this. I brought a team of people here. Before you head back there, guys, I want you to come forward and just come down here for just a minute. I brought a team of people here. This is a prayer team from our church. And the reason why I'm asking them to come forward for just a second is when we dismiss, I want you to know that all these people will be standing up in the grass in this area behind you. And if there's anything that you need prayer for, if you just want to cry, or if you want to pray, if you want to talk, these good folks will be here for you. So as we get ready to dismiss, just know, go ahead guys, just go ahead up into the grass. Just know that they're here to minister to you, to pray with you, to cry with you, to listen to your story, whatever it is that you need. Did you want me to dismiss or you got it? Is that okay? All right. So I want to thank you guys for being here. I also want to thank again the Hero organization and again, Jen Dombrowski for putting this together. If you guys would just give her a round of applause. And I just want to ask you tonight to be good to one another, love one another, and enjoy the rest of the evening. But please, if you want prayer or anything, we have some good folks out here. Have a great night.